Welcome to Cultivating Civility, the podcast where we explore how to tackle toxic behavior in public life and shape a culture of respect and trust in our communities. I'm your host, Kalen-Sukra, author of Save Your City and founder of Kalen Academy, and I'm thrilled to bring you yet another essential conversation for civic leaders and engaged citizens alike. Today we're diving into one of the most pressing leadership challenges of our time, holding our own side accountable. In an era of deep political polarization, where outrage is often rewarded and tribal loyalty can override integrity, how do we lead differently? How do we resist the forces that push us toward division and instead foster the trust and courage needed for genuine leadership? To explore these questions, I'm joined by Ron Holifield, a servant leadership provocateur and CEO of Strategic Government Resources, SGR. With decades of experience in city management and leadership development, Ron has dedicated his career to training and equipping civic leaders to lead with integrity and a commitment to the greater good. His firm, SGR, works with over 700 local governments across the country to recruit, assess, and develop leaders who prioritize service over self-interest. Ron is also the author of Fourth Dimension Leadership, a radical strategy for creating an authentic servant leadership culture, where he challenges conventional leadership models and calls for a return to servant leadership. In this conversation, we take on the hard truths of leadership in today's climate, including why trust is the foundation of leadership and how we rebuild it, the moral courage required to challenge bad actors within our own ranks, and how we break free from toxic political cycles and refocus on the common good. This is a must-listen episode for anyone who wants to lead with integrity in an era of division. So let's dive in. Welcome, Ron.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Honored to have you here. And I wanted to begin by asking you a bit about some foundational principles that you established way early on. Some of them you even wrote about in your book, Fourth Dimension Leadership, a radical strategy for creating authentic servant leadership culture. And in that book, you remind us that change is possible, but if it's going to happen, it's got to start with you. And this is one of your signature lines. This message is also central to our approach to civility today, that if you want to save your city from toxic culture, you've got to save yourself first. You've got to be civil. What is the impact of a civic leader who, in all of their interactions, all of them, with subordinates, with superiors, with the public, what is the impact of that kind of individual when they lead with civility? What kind of an impact do they have on their sphere of influence?
Yeah, the reality is how you treat people actually determines the level of trust. One of the things we talk about in Fourth Dimension Leadership is that the foundational level is relational leadership. That is leadership from the side where you have no authority. And it's where you actually, by how you treat people, you engender trust in you as a leader. Developing people so that they lead in a way that causes people to trust them. And trust, part of trust is predictability. And that begins to transform the workplace. Same thing is true of elected officials. When they actually deal with citizens in an honest way, and they sit down and can explain why they voted the way they did, and they're being transparent, the citizens actually trust them more, even if they're mad at them over the particular issue. So part of the challenge is our short-term mindset, and we've created an era in which we're scared to death of anybody being mad at us. And so as a result, we tell people what they want to hear, and that actually erodes trust.
So it seems like it takes a certain measure of courage in order to get people to trust you, because you've got to be willing to accept their potential, falling out of favor with them. Do you feel that this crisis of trust that we face, local governments generally have a higher level of trust than other levels of government, but still we see it on the decline? Would you say that at the core of it is this issue, this relational issue of being able to establish trust through honesty, through courage, through speaking the truth?
Absolutely. And we're in an environment right now. We have people trying to defend what is fundamentally, completely, and totally defenseless. People will forgive you for doing something they disagree with, but if you lose their trust, they will never ever trust you again. And one of the things where we've gotten stuff really screwed up is that historically there was a sense of leadership that said the higher you go, the more your obligation to lead in a transparent and trust building way is. Now we're in an environment that too many leaders lead by simply trying to drive as much conflict and division as they can. And what we see happen is leaders that lead that way end up getting eaten by the very people they kept stirred up, because it creates this unending cycle of purity, so to speak, that you get narrower and narrower and narrower about. You must agree with everything exactly like I say it, or I'm going to brutalize you. And the only way to break that cycle is to endure the abuse and just say, okay, I'm going to act different. I'm not going to keep perpetuating the cycle. One example I use of that with city councils when we're working with them is that in a political mindset with a governing body, the tendency is to protect your side from the dais. And so the behavior starts getting wound up and all of that, and you'll protect your side, but you may even jump on with the other side that's getting brutalized. The key to building trust and civility is to move exactly the opposite of a political mindset and move with a leadership mindset, and to basically hold accountable your own supporters. Right. Because there is no moral high ground in simply taking up for your side. The moral high ground comes when you hold your supporters. And what I always tell councils is, if you really want to transform the civility, you're responsible to say to the audience, I know that you know that I agree with you on this issue. I'm on the opposite side of Tom or Susie or whatever, but I will not be a part of this kind of behavior. And if you keep acting that way, I'm going to walk away from the dais, and you for sure will not have the votes you want. That holding your own side accountable is the moral high ground.
This point that you're making is, I think, something that a lot of people have a difficult time even navigating intellectually, because we are social beings and we are living in a time of social chaos and ethical chaos. So when something feels like solidarity of the gang, solidarity of my team, there are associated values of loyalty and honor that go to the team, but those feelings ought to be going to the common good and to the collective body and to the higher purpose. And in organizations in particular that have lost their sense of purpose, but I see good people getting caught in that trap that you just identified. And then realizing if they're going to get out of it, sometimes there's a real price to pay. It requires courage, outspokenness, skill, and the price. And it's the price, absolutely, I think, the sacrifice, the idea that you may actually lose something in the course of being this type of leader that you're describing. How do you help people process that? Because we're in this kind of win-win-win society, right? And when you're dealing with someone who's come to you and they got a really tough decision to make that could cost them maybe even their job.
Absolutely.
Yeah. How do you counsel them?
So part of it is actually every governing body ought to do 2 offsites a year. One that happens right after an election is all about the governance policies, the rules of the game. What has happened, one of the shifts and the second is about goal setting and vision and all of that. But part of what has happened historically, people climbed the civic ladder before running for city council or for the governing body. Climbing the city ladder included time on the planning commission, the parks board, whatever, and they learned how the system operates. In today's world, interests that are not looking out for the public interest will pump money into getting somebody to run, and they show up at the first council meeting figuratively wearing a baseball cap and carrying a catcher's mitt, and everybody else has a helmet and shoulder pads on, and they get crushed. And instead of being introspective and going, maybe I should have learned the rules of the game before I walked onto the field, they do just the opposite. They decide it's a conspiracy. Yeah. Everybody's in on this conspiracy. So it's this diluting of the gene pool, so to speak, of leadership that is not owning our responsibility as leaders, that's contributing so much to the dysfunction. And generally speaking, when I'm working with elected officials, once we kind of, like so many things in life, once we kind of map it out, it's a clear aha moment. Everybody sees it.
Prior to doing what you're doing today, sharing your wisdom with others through your firm, you spent years in local government at the highest levels, and your conviction for the servant leadership model and this vision of leadership came through that. Can you share with us, today in the local government sector, we are recruiting a lot of people who maybe didn't come from the public service, who never even heard about some impartiality and all these other concepts that are so fundamental to good governance and proper conduct. Why did you decide that the servant leadership model was so central to local government?
I would say it was more the values before we called them that. And I mean, it was Robert Greenleaf that originally wrote the book. But before we began to embrace it overtly, it really was heavily influenced by the internal motivation that had pulled me into local government, i.e. wanting to make the world a better place and those sorts of things, and the ICMA Code of Ethics. It profoundly affected me, that basically said, if you took everything with servant leadership and distilled it down to one pithy little quote, that quote is, it's not about me, it's not about now. And that's like, if you can, as a leader, if you can take and walk the talk of it's not about me, it's not about now, everything else, it's not just that it becomes your guiding light, it's also what allows you to endure all of the insanity without you losing your way, because you recognize no matter what kind of abuse I'm getting, it's not about me and it's not about now. I'm part of something bigger and more important than me.
It makes perfect sense that you call it servant leadership provocateur, because it's not about me, it's not about now, is the exact opposite. You'd have to be provoking mainstream society, because in our society, it's all about me, and it is all about now. And so you're challenging some really two core values, which is another thing that I wanted to ask you about, because it is those values of individualism and hyper transactional consumerism, that self-interest and immediate gain, that are so popular and really cherished. Even might is right is a cherished value in our sort of mainstream culture. And yet that has resulted in the erosion of these values that you're supporting around integrity and mutual respect and, compromise and sacrifice and servant leadership. How have you found that these individualistic, let's say hyper-individualistic values have compromised or eroded governance at the city level, both at the table in terms of the operations of the city as well?
Oh, horribly. Part of it is that we worked with one city that one of the city council members would literally go to board and commission meetings where everybody saw them as an elected official and would just flat out lie about what the rest of the council was doing. I mean, bald face, no gray area whatsoever. And he felt justified in that, because once it's about him, then anything, if it's all about me, then anything that advances me, I can rationalize. Yes. And so that's one example. I would say we see a lot of city councils that have one or two members who are just bent on destruction. And the challenge is that the rest of the council frequently are just really good people, but they haven't really climbed the civic ladder and learned how to be leaders in a difficult environment. And they are frustrated because they don't know what to do. They don't know how to deal with somebody who really does have a dark heart. And so they end up in this, that they're easily manipulated, and they end up in this trap of dysfunction, because to push back aggressively with folks who are living for the purpose of division, they don't feel good to be fussing and fighting. And so they become passive sometimes, and that enables the bully.
There is a strategy and a style of leadership that's required to deal very concretely with individuals like that who are actually a hazard. They will consume and subsume the entire organization in their own interests, eventually, if not stopped by the people around them. And that requires
absolutely
a kind of strength. I know you like your passion and purpose on this issue has made your firm the leading firm in training local government servant leaders. And you have resources like the newsletters, through strategic government resources that people can log on to and stay in touch. Thank you for sharing and generously today with us.
Absolutely. My joy to be here. I appreciate it so very much.
Thank you, Ron. I'd like to invite you to join the Cultivating Civility Masterclass, a one-of-a-kind, on-demand, self-paced, online program designed for busy civic leaders, just 4 to 5 hours to complete. Inside, you'll gain a step-by-step roadmap to renewing civic culture, a civic culture assessment tool, exclusive insights from over a dozen visionary civic leaders worldwide, a masterclass certificate, and the Cultivating Civility Leader Golden Seal, and so much more. Enroll today at kalenacademy.com/civility masterclass. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Cultivating Civility podcast. Please feel free to share and subscribe. Until next time, let's keep cultivating civility one conversation at a time.